The upcoming panel discussion is part of the Expo Live Impact Series, a number of conversations and networking events bringing like-minded individuals together to discuss how purposeful innovations are playing a meaningful role in creating a positive impact in society. At the heart of these events are 140 awardees from 76 countries. Two and one virtually will be sharing their insights today for you. We hope that through these conversations, we can redefine what is possible and inspire new partnerships on entrepreneurship, corporations, government, and so much more. With that, I'd love to introduce you to the moderator for today's panel, Dan Al-Mahza, who's a colleague and a dear friend.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Abdullah, and thank you all for being here, both for those who are here in person and, of course, to our virtual audience. Thanks to our panelists for being here from different parts of the world, and of course, we also, as Abdullah mentioned, have a panelist joining us virtually, and we will see him and hear from him shortly. So today's panel discussion is going to be talking about a really big issue that we are all, hopefully by now, well aware of, which is food waste. We have over here the experts in the topic who have been working hard for many years in their respective countries in this field and working towards reducing the food waste issue. So if we can get a brief introduction from each of you, just a little bit, let the audience know a little bit about what you guys do. We can start over here with Charles from Second Harvest from Japan.
Yeah, basically what we do is take surplus food that's out in the community and match it up with people who can use it in a way that matches our culture there in Japan.
Great. And Tinia, can you tell us a little bit more about your work at Renewable?
Yeah, thank you. We take unrecoverable food waste from food manufacturers and distributors, and we turn it into organic hydroponic nutrients so that soilless farms or farms that grow predominantly in hydroponic systems can grow food using food waste as a mechanism to do so.
Thank you very much. And of course, last but not least, Andriy, can you tell us a little bit about what Biosense does in Ukraine?
Hello everyone, and first of all, sorry that I can't participate personally. It's a pity to be in Dubai but not be allowed to participate physically because of this COVID situation. My name is Andrew, and I'm from Biosense, and in Biosense we are working in a food testing business. So we provide ability to farmers, traders, and food processing companies to conduct the test in less than half hour instead of weeks, if they will need to send samples to the laboratory. And in that case, if you can test it in more earlier stage, so you can prevent this contamination and also food waste. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andriy, and we're also sorry that you can't be here in person, but thank you once again for joining us virtually. So I read a statistic about food waste, and it said that in 2021, the global statistic, which may be incorrect and probably has already increased by now, is that 17% of food production goes to waste. And if that does not sound like a scary enough number, then that equates to 931 million tons of food that could potentially go to waste. Now, depending on who you ask and depending on how you are actually defining food waste, then the number may be different, maybe less and maybe more. And I'll have, obviously, these wonderful panelists to talk to us a little bit more about that. But food waste is a whole cycle. There are multiple stages to food waste. There are multiple factors that are obviously considered when it comes to food waste. There is food waste at the production. There is food waste in the whole stage of whether it's through the farming, whether it's through the supply chain, or at the time of supply chain, whether it's through sales, and then also as consumers in our own households, at restaurants, etc. So the nice thing that we have here in the panel is we have different individuals from different parts of the world that are addressing this massive issue at different stages and through different ways. So if you can tell us a little bit about your respective organizations and what you guys do, how you are solving this issue, and at what stage are you solving it? So we'll start with Tinia. Tell us a little bit about Renewable.
Thank you, Dana. So at least in the US and specifically in New York, we focus on more upstream or the pre-consumer food waste streams. And so what that means is are often less contaminated, more controlled from a contamination standpoint. These are large volumes. So an example of a supplier that we work with is a food manufacturer that takes a mix of vegetables, they freeze them, and they sell it as a bagged mixed raw vegetable good through supermarkets. We get the food waste residual or supply that doesn't meet their quality controls. And so whether temperature, they failed a criteria there, or it doesn't have the look, quality, or aesthetics that food is particularly preferred by consumers, we'll receive that as an alternative to farms, because unfortunately some of the farms that are closest to the food waste supplier that we work with doesn't provide the reliable service of taking that food waste and giving it to their livestock. So we can come in and be a more consistent, reliable partner. Ultimately, their goal is to just have a very streamlined operations. They're not wanting to get into the business of selling food waste as a commodity or trying to divert it or process it, and that's the value that we can add. What we've seen in the US, however, is whether it's at the grocery level or even at the food service level, these types of businesses are going to continue to buy the amount of food that they need to make sure that they can provide the quality to their consumers. They oftentimes don't optimize to reduce the amount of food waste. So, what we can do as consumers is buy less of what we're actually going to cook, because these types of food service operators continue to buy the volume based on their projections. They're not changing it based on potential food waste loss. And that's where the major issue that we often encounter.
That's really interesting. And also you actually touched on multiple stages of the whole food waste cycle. Hopefully this is a cycle that we can break, and by the end of this discussion we'll learn how these organizations are actually supporting us in that, and hopefully help us to make better choices moving forward. Andrew, you also start at the very early stages of the cycle, so I'll move it on to you to tell us a bit about how you tackle this issue.
So as I told you, so we are working in the food testing business, and how we work, so we provide for farmers, traders, and food processing companies device for testing, with which they can conduct the test in real time in the field, and also web service where they can make analytics of previous results and make decision what to do next. So, and if you are speaking about mycotoxins, according to FAO, around 1 billion ton of food products are wasted because of mycotoxins contamination. So just imagine it's enough to feed all continent during the whole year. And we truly believe, which is already confirmed by our proof of concept with the potential customers, that detection in early stage can decrease this number. So so how we're working with the food waste, so we provide solution with which you can detect this contamination. And right now I'm speaking about specifically about mycotoxins, so it's like organic contamination. In as much earlier, if you're speaking about seeds value chain, for example, like corn, as much earlier as we can with our solution.
Andrew, can you just clarify, did you say 1 million or 1 billion? Mm-hmm. Both scare me, but I would just like to make sure that I got the right figure.
1 billion tons.
Wow. 1 billion, and that is at the very early stage of the cycle. This is before anything reaches a consumer. This is just, this is at the growing stage. So very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Charles, can you tell us?
Not also before. So if we are speaking about, the final product, there is a lot of cases. So for example, in Europe, during only last year, so we had around 600 cases of border rejection of food product because of mycotoxins contamination. So what it means? So for example, if one of the company export products from one country to another country, and on the border, when they make this detection, so they found a lot of contamination of mycotoxins, and in the end, so you need to how to say it? You need to destroy this product. So, and companies also lost a lot of money because of that. Yeah. So yeah, what I want to tell that not only in early stage but also in the next steps of production, we are trying to help to solve this issue.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. But it is important to know that because part of it, at least, is at an early stage, that it can potentially be preventable. So hopefully with solutions such as Biosense, then a lot of that can in fact be prevented. So Charles, actually, you do something a little bit different. You know, it's at a completely different stage of the food waste cycle. So it would be interesting to delve deeper into that.
Yes, basically, we're handling the majority of our food at the end of the supply chain. It's either gone out to the retailer or it's in the process of going out to the retailer. Our country imports 60% of our calorie consumption every year. So we get a lot of the food that comes in from overseas in transport, it can be damaged. We like to say in Japan that if it's not perfect, pristine, or presentable, it doesn't get purchased. And when I say pristine, I don't mean the product itself, I mean the case that comes in that product. So we have these 3 cans right here. If the case that came there was not pristine, that whole case would get rejected. So we have very, very high standards in Japan. The upside of that is we have very, very few deaths every year related to food poisoning. In the United States, my country where I was born, we have 2,000 to 3,000 people every year. In Japan, we have maybe 10 to 15. That's incredible standards for your food. So if you ever come to Japan, you guarantee your food's going to be safe. The downside of that is where you get a lot of rejections. You get a lot of surplus food or food that doesn't meet those standards. What is troubling for people to hear, but is a reality, is that food loss and food waste is a natural byproduct of our system. I mean, this is going to occur, right, because of that. The second one you should be aware of, that there's anywhere from 100 to 165 different definitions for food loss and food waste. Japan is quite different from the rest of the world. How we don't even use the word waste. We only use the word food loss. And so when you hear numbers, you should keep that in mind, that we're not unified in what it is, right? This is probably not a good analogy, but I'll put it out there anyways. We all know what art is, and we probably know what pornography is, right? But there's a hard way to get a definition of those, right? So food loss, we know what it is when we see it, but we all don't have a unified definition of what it is. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have tackled the issue, but we should just be aware of that in our mind when we're going about trying to achieve zero food waste or zero food loss.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about the food bank that you guys operate?
Yeah, so the unique thing we did, and this is through Expo Live, was that as people shop or choose what they would like to have, we asked them to do something to give back, to pay it forward. And this really taps into one of our core values in Japanese culture. The word is ongaishi, to give back, to reciprocate. And so creating this avenue for people to do that, it creates a way for people to get the food that they need in a way that makes us feel good about ourselves. And it changes the whole environment from just a one-way, I'm giving you something, take it and go home, to the actual recipient being able to reciprocate, to give back. And we change the whole dynamics of the relationship there.
I actually have a question for you, Charles. So in the U.S., there's been a lot of upcycling, and that upcycling of the waste stream, mostly at food processing. So there's a company called Rhines, and they'll take fruit skins and dehydrate that and turn it into a consumable food product. If you change the food loss into a word that could benefit your second harvest so that they have more of an association with impact, do you think that would help you?
Well, that's a good question because in 2019 they put a law into effect to promote the reduction of food loss. The unintended consequences that we saw less food coming to us, or food that we couldn't use, commercial volumes of food. So 10 kilos of butter, 20 kilos of something, which is very appropriate for an institution, but for individuals, not too many people are going to be happy getting a 10-kilo bar of butter to take home. So that was the unintended consequences of that law right there.
Got it.
That's really interesting. Thanks for bringing that up, Tinia. And just before I go into the question that, in fact, relates a lot to what you guys had just mentioned, Charles, earlier you were telling us a very important point about how it is important to distinguish between, obviously, food waste or food loss, or whichever definition we are using for it, between that and hunger. While, yes, Second Harvest, through the food bank that they have and that they operate, they are potentially tackling both issues, but these are in fact two completely separate issues. So would you like to touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, so as human beings, we see food go to waste, and we know there are people out there in the world that are hungry, and it's a natural reaction to say, if I could get this to this person, it would solve that issue. That's a natural. But the reason why we have food loss and food waste is because consumer choice. Somewhere along the line, they're saying, I want to give the consumer a choice, and we want to have that choice, right? We don't want to give that up. That's what creates the loss and the waste. People don't have food, not because of waste, but they don't have access to food. If you look in the 1930s in the United States, we had the Depression. Massive volumes of milk was being destroyed, produce was being destroyed, and people were going hungry. Why? Because they didn't have jobs, they didn't have money to purchase that product and stuff. And that's just not in the United States. You look throughout here that people go hungry not because of lack of food, but lack of access to food. And so two separate issues here that we need to tackle separately. You know, emotionally, we think they are connected.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And it is important, obviously, to distinguish the two, but it would be that in an ideal world, if we can solve one issue, then we are automatically solving another. Unfortunately, this is not the case here, but just a kind of good way a good reminder for us to be thinking about things. So I may ask this because of my culture, and so for all the Arabs out here, you know that our culture is very generous when it comes to food. So more is better, and the consequences of food waste or food loss are not always considered when it comes to, mostly when it comes to hospitality, or when it comes to accepting guests or serving people. So I can maybe say, from just a consumer and not an expert in the topic, that in our own culture, this is largely what contributes to food waste, from a consumer standpoint at least. So seeing as you're coming from very different parts of the world, we have someone here from Japan, from Ukraine, and then of course from the US. Can you give us a little bit of cultural context, how the culture or society that you work in is playing a role in the issue of food waste?
Yeah, I'll start. In New York City, with the former mayor, they were trying to do neighborhood composting, and they would provide the bins for free. They did a lot of education. In certain areas within the 5 boroughs, they were doing pilots. It was ineffective in the rollout, and so therefore the new mayor that just was officiated about several months ago stopped that program. And as a result, there's been a lot of backlash because we have the composting infrastructure, but now the budget constraints due to COVID, it's going to get back to where we were, and not able to meet the state mandated goals for climate reduction or mitigation. And the problem is that consumers or residents of apartments, it was hard to get the property managers of those buildings to subscribe and try to buy in and commit to the city rollout. So I think until the city did a true mandated implementation program, there's not enough, I would say, goodwill for people to just willingly volunteer and commit to these types of things. I think in most cases needs to be a policy change along with behavioral and education, because behavior doesn't change just by education.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Andrew, Charles, who would like to take it?
Go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah, I will jump in quickly. So as you might know, so Ukraine, it's an agricultural company, and to be sure and to be clear, there is not a lot of things during the last years was done in a food waste direction. Few years ago, so from the government was established Ukrainian Startup Fund, which support innovative ideas and also in food related fields. So it's just like few years fund and its support, and so some of the ideas is already failed, some of the idea is growing up. Yeah, but what I want to say, so we are on the beginning of that work.
And yeah.
And so I alluded earlier, in Japan we have high standards for our food, and it's wonderful, it's very safe, but sometimes we become so divorced from our food that we don't understand about it. And I'll give you a concrete example. Sushi. You would think that the best flavor for sushi is immediately after it's caught, correct? Mm-hmm. Actually, it's 2 to 3 weeks afterwards. And I heard this a couple years ago, and I thought, from a sushi chef, and this year I was out visiting the countryside, and I saw a sushi or tuna being prepared, and I asked the guy, I said, when did you catch this? He goes, oh, about 2 or 3 weeks ago. That sushi was amazing. In other words, people would, and this happens with milk quite often, people will go to the back and choose the milk that's freshest, but actually milk tastes better after it sits for a couple days, gets more flavorful. But when we pick that thing in the back, the stuff in the front, if it doesn't get sold that day, it gets thrown away. So up to the mid-80s in Japan, we only printed the date that it was produced and used your own tongue and your nose and your senses to decide if it was good or bad, right? Now we print the expiration date, and people, this was got to be eaten right before the expiration date, right? And so we rob ourselves of some opportunities to eat good things if we knew the process of the flavor. One last real quick one. This is years ago. We had 800 tons of canned tomato juice. A small labeling error meant they couldn't go out to the market. Had 5-year shelf left on it. It took us a year of negotiating between ourselves, the government, and the manufacturer. And I said to the this thing's already been on the shelf for a year and stuff. Is that okay? He goes, hey, actually, it tastes better after 2 years.
And I'll also kind of tag on that. I think it is, I said earlier that behavior change is not enough, but it is becoming more accepted, more cool to whether it's like own secondhand items or, get expired or next to expired food from restaurants or supermarkets, and there's secondary kind of marketplaces via an app or an online platform that are selling some of those quickly to expire foods. So it does seem to be shifting. I just think there has to be other kind of more policy forces to alongside.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because even here you see that change more recently. You see that. Well, to your point of, yes, obviously, where you go grab your milk, obviously the one in front is that is more recent to expiring. But in general, in some supermarkets, the first aisle that you will see as you are entering are the foods that are near to expiration. And also they will be at a discounted price to support the consumer or to try to motivate the consumer to purchase those, obviously. So there are things that, it's interesting that you mentioned, because even over here, we kind of see stuff like that. So there are things happening, and all of you kind of mentioned, well, maybe because I asked from a cultural sense, kind of policy, and we can see that in Japan, even just the inclusion of the expiration dates, which is something that they previously did not have written there, changed a lot. But to your point, Tania, there is a big role of consumer. This is a huge social issue, which does not only require support from manufacturing stage, support from from the policymakers, but also from the consumers, we have to make better choices, right? So what are your respective organizations doing to support that behavioral change?
I'll start. I'll be honest in that we aren't directly interfacing with consumers since we're B2B. So we work with more indoor farms, and we try to help them take either their post-harvest waste, so trimmings and roots, and upcycle that into a source of biostimulants and potable water. That's very much a technology still in validation mode. Right now, we take the waste that I was mentioning earlier closer to the food processing and turning that into an upcycled product so that these farms can grow with less or completely eliminated usage of mineral salts. It's more of a commercial change, and I think at least I can speak to the U.S. and maybe Canada. A lot of these farms indoors are beating their chests about sustainability, and that's how they're competing. And I think that's helped us certainly. We're just trying to make it a bit more transparent and forward-facing so that a lot of these farms are actually doing what they're claiming to do. So not so much on the consumer, we don't have much impact there.
Sure, but do you feel that consumers, do they hear, or just general people, do they hear about your solution? Just by learning that you are there to solve such an issue, I guess consumers will naturally become more aware. So do you feel as though there's kind of awareness at least increase?
Yeah, absolutely. And for that reason, when we try to raise awareness, we're not doing the best job right now, but ultimately as we grow, it's to educate our direct commercial farms as well as the consumer, because the farms need to be able to sell to the consumer, and it's got to be a two-sided shift. And we don't see other fertilizer suppliers being collaborative and supporting the market in that way. Consumers are questioning their supermarkets. So in the US, you may have heard of Whole Foods or Kroger's, and those wholesale buyers are holding these producers accountable to sustainability metrics. They're paying attention to their energy efficiency, what is their carbon footprint. So it depends on the farm scale. Not every farm is able to pay for that expense, but most farms that want to be able to grow at that level and have those types of customers are willing to invest in that way.
Very interesting. Charles, do you want to go ahead?
So on the donor side, for us, the big thing has been to create trust with our donors. They're entrusting us with their product, their brand, and to make sure that we can trace where it goes to and to make sure it's used responsibly. That's a key concern of theirs. And so we've been doing this now for 20 years, and we've been a good track record there. And so we have a lot of donors. But you still have cases where it's heartbreaking when you know there's a good product out there that could go to people, and the decision is made somewhere along the line that we can't release it. We have to destroy it. And so that is heartbreaking. On the recipient side, giving the food out to people, that has been a change. And that when we've been asking people, it was really kind of counterintuitive when we started asking people to do things, to donate food as they're picking up food. The first time I did this, my partner said, "You know people are hungry, right?" "Yeah." "And you're asking hungry people to give you stuff?" "Yeah." He says, "Good luck with that." So I flew off to Okinawa and we did it, and 70% of the people brought something the first time we did it. Came back the next month, that went up to 90%. And it's been consistent there for the last 18 months, that people consistently come and donate and bring something, and it reinforces one of their key values in Okinawa, in Japanese, yuimaru, to give back, to help one another. Change the whole dynamics of the system that we did that. So that's, I don't know if it's a change, but giving people an opportunity to do something different.
I would definitely see that as a change because again, I mean, well, the way you worded it is great because you're just, to you, you feel you are just giving them an opportunity, but these could be people who otherwise would not have known the value of that little act. And so giving them the opportunity is also teaching them a little bit about the issue and also raising awareness. And of course, that in itself feeds into a little bit of behavioral change, right?
Right.
At least that's how I would see it. So do you still, at Second Harvest, accept food donations from individuals?
We do.
You do?
We do.
Okay,
We
great,
do. We're doing
great.
that. We'll be out there this weekend right now down in Okinawa doing that. And so if I can just give you one quick story about that. So I was there, usually the guy who's checking in people, and this little girl came up and she shoved her can in me like, she's upset, she's there, she's, I said, do you know the word? I said, do you know the word yuimaru? And she goes, I don't know, you know. I said, well, your can is going to go out to another family. She said, really? I said, yeah. Immediately she turned to look up at her mother and said in Japanese, you know, obviously, you know, Mom, you're really, really kind. So that child learned something, a value of an Okinawa by experiencing it, and the mother got this unprovoked compliment from her daughter and stuff. And so she also was like, I am also participant here. I'm not just someone who's getting something without doing something. And so that's when I see something like that happen, you go, I think we're making some progress here.
No, you definitely are, definitely. And Andrew, I guess your situation is slightly different because, again, to the point that you made earlier, and similar to Tinia's situation, in Biosense, it's not so much a consumer facing. So I'll kind of change my question a little bit to you as opposed to seeing what the organization is doing for behavioral change, but what is it that you need from a policy change, and how are you trying to achieve that in order to obviously better support your innovation to hopefully bring an end to food waste?
Yeah, so you are right. So we are not working in the B2C market, so we are more like B2B. So, and our clients is the farmers, traders, and food processing companies. And if you are speaking about, let's say farmers, so okay, so we provide device for testing, but what next? Okay, they conduct the test, and and they found some contamination. So what to do next? And in that case, we provide recommendation. And if we define this really in the early stage, so we can prevent this waste of their commodities, and of course in the end, so they can sell these commodities in a higher price. Yeah, so I'm not sure that it was your question, but there is my answer.
No, thank you so much for that. And my final question to all of you, just before we go to the audience and see if you have any questions, is, again, we've been saying food waste, and thank you, Charles, for clarifying that food waste can mean a lot of things. And simplest example is in Japan, we say food loss. So we are talking about food waste, which in reality is all of our issue. You know, it's not Tinia's issue, it's not Charles's issue, and it's certainly not Andrew's issue. So it is all of our issue. What made the three of you individually feel accountable and take this global issue and make it your issue to solve?
Mine's a bit more indirect. So back in 2012, I was doing a lot of pro bono teaching through a program on the weekends, and the class was going from Saturdays at 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. And this was at a high school in Harlem called Thurgood Marshall. And a lot of the food options that the kids were bringing to eat were highly fried, just not the most nutritionally dense food. So you would see immediately after lunch how their attention levels would drop off. And I always felt like there's not much I can do after lunch because their retention and the energy that they were giving to this was kind of falling. And it all comes down to one's health, and that really is tied to nutrition. And so looking at how much we were exporting as food waste, I always felt that as we're going to continue encountering some of these challenges in the future, and look at what we are facing today, right? Higher heat, more challenges growing outdoors, more food is going to be grown indoors. How can we take this growing food waste stream as more people inhabit urban areas so that more growers can produce organic food ideally, or just using less chemical inputs? And so it was with that intention to help people have more access to greater organic food supply and hopefully bringing down that price point so that they could afford it. Admittedly, will never have a direct impact on people's behavior in purchasing the organic produce, but hopefully with more food waste, diverted and recovered for nutrients, that can enable more growers.
Very interesting. I like how it started by being a teacher and just seeing, seeing different behaviors, and having to solve that issue took you into kind of working towards solving I don't know if I want to say bigger issue, but an equally important issue. What about you, Charles?
Well, so I grew up in the 70s, and I remember, one time I didn't have enough. Didn't want to eat all my food. And my mom said, hey, you're starving kids out, in some part of the world. You should, And my response was, well, Mom, let's just send them the food. Put it in a Tupperware. I don't think she slapped me in the side of the head, but it was kind of the equivalent, like, you can't do that. But I do know the feeling when I myself, because we didn't always have enough food, that I was able to find food through different means, different ways, and what that made me feel secure inside and wanting to be able to do the same thing for other people, that we have enough resources out there in the world, and to match them up with people that can do that. On a personal level, for me, obviously, I'm not Japanese. I know people confuse that quite often. But I've been blessed for over 30 years of my time in Japan, and so this is a way for me to give back, to say thank you for all you've given to me. And so it's a small thing in my mind what I do to do that. So that's kind of the other side of the motivation for me. And when I do it, I don't feel an outsider. I feel a part of the community. I feel this is my community. This is where I belong. And I would like to see us to have a world like that, where maybe we have a passport, maybe we have a place where we're born and stuff, but where we choose to put our roots down and be our community, that's where we can take ownership and make a difference. And so my work has been my opportunity to do that.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And it's great that you took that opportunity as well, because there's obviously great impact and a lot of people benefiting through that. And last but not least, Andrew?
Yeah, in my case, so I haven't crime stories, so no one from my family died because of mycotoxins contamination. But mycotoxins, I didn't told that mycotoxins. So around 155,000 people get in liver cancer because they eat food contaminated by mycotoxins. But in my case, so the story is pretty simple. So before Biosense, I had some entrepreneurial experience. So I created electrical engineering company because I had my master's degree in electrical engineering. And after that, another company which was involved so it's like vending business. So we did this, provide this vending, like washing machine for students. And this business is still working. And after that, but this business cannot be grow exponentially. So it's like classic business. And I start to think how can I grow globally with which product, what experience I have, what background I have, which I can use for that. And and on that time I did my PhD, and the theme of the PhD was developing biosensors for mycotoxins contamination, different type of biosensors. And and I had this background, and I start how can I implement this research which I already done in real life, and to make it happen and help the world and change it a little bit.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm obviously happy to hear that nobody has died from mycotoxin, but hopefully with Biosense, neither will a lot of people now, hopefully, in the Ukraine and then the rest of the world. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. But before that, of course, please help me in giving a round of applause to our wonderful panelists. Do we have any questions? If you just raise your hand, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Mita Sanchez. First of all, I'm very proud of you guys. It's very inspiring what you're doing. My question is in your context. For example, in New York, you work with the retail, if I'm not mistaken. So from what you see, what is the trend of the food waste year by year by those retails? And is there any advocacy to help them reduce and to make the projection is more reasonable to reduce the food waste? That's my first question. And then the second is how much could be waste reduced to get to the optimum for sustainable business for you too? Because you however, we create jobs from the food waste. So how could be, what is what is the rate for the reasonable food waste that we can achieve, or yeah, we can target to be able to make the business sustainably working. And for Mr. Charles, also, I have one question for you for the context of Japan. In my opinion, this country is very efficient in everything. So, from your perspective, you say that food is byproduct. Is not, you know, we can use that. But is that reasonable to reach zero food waste? Thank you. That's all my questions.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Thanks for those questions, by the way. So there were three. I'm going to try to make sure I hit two at least, because my memory is going each day. So the first question was, what are the trends? You know, and we deal with suppliers before retail. So they're supplying to retailers or food service. But I'll speak to what I'm seeing on both ends. So there are companies like, spoiler alert, where they're creating sensors and AI to be able to detect the food waste loss at the point of distribution and at the point of retail, so that before a purchase is even made, they're knowing how much less or more to be able to optimize purchasing to prevent food waste. So technology-enabled, sensor-enabled, or software-enabled technology has done very well. You know, it's been harder for us because we're in manufacturing and we're dealing with capital-intensive. It's a capital-intensive business model, so there's less people trying to do what we're doing. But I see more of that. And then secondly, and I think the second question was around, you know, like how much food loss is perhaps optimal at the supermarket level or retail level. You know, because they optimize more for quality than anything else, and every grower is saying that theirs is more nutritionally robust, nutritionally dense, they're honestly purchasing from the producers based on values of the consistency of quality, the pricing, and the freshness and sustainability of it. Less of, you know, what, how can they reduce their food loss? And I say that because, you know, I know for a fact some of these retailers, because they're so optimally operating from a procurement perspective, they could care less. I hate to say it, they could care less about reducing the volume. They're more about how can we continue to be as efficient as possible, even though we're encountering the same levels of food waste each week. But more are trying to adopt some of the software technologies that I mentioned earlier. And then the last question was around what is that measurement or metric that these retailers are being held accountable to. I can't speak on that. I do want to say that since ESG, or environmental social governance, has become a very hot topic from a shareholder perspective, and just how some of these retailers are being invested, they are paying attention to that. But there's a lot of greenwashing in the industry, and there's more organizations trying to create transparency of how the metrics are being measured, but there's not one unifying body that is creating the gold standard of those metrics. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think she answered the question for you that no, we cannot get to zero waste. It's impossible. Logistics. Also, to get us to zero waste would mean we'd have no choice as a consumer. And so that's the trade-off I think that we need to think as consumers. You also need to understand companies, it's not in their interest to waste. It's a cost to them. It's a lost cost opportunity, right? Now, they build that into their model of selling the product to us as consumers. We pay for that, right? So yes, they're you know, saying there they do waste product and stuff, but they have an economic model to do that. So we will never get to zero waste. And yeah, leave it there.
Yeah, and I want to jump in a little bit so about this question about zero waste from my side, from mycotoxin field. So in our case, we also it's impossible to achieve zero waste, and our goal. But we really believe that we can decrease in 20% waste of the commodities if we are using in time on-site diagnostics in early stage. So and 20%. So it's our like big goal to achieve it in 10 years, and it means that 200 million tons we will have less because of mycotoxins. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your answers, and thank you for your question. Well, it's very clear now that we cannot achieve zero waste, but we are lucky to have supported such great innovations that are at least taking us to a better place and supporting the world in at least reducing food waste. So please help me in giving them a round of applause one more time. And with that, we end the sessions here at Expo Live for Food, Agricultures and Livelihoods Week at Expo 2020 Dubai. Thank you once again for being here, and thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.